Well, that's great. Well, thank you, Jessica. And hello, everybody all over the country, probably all over the world. I'm really pleased to be able to do this, and thanks Citrix for inviting me to do this. Citrix we've had a long relationship. I think Michael Guarneri is in the seminar with us right now, but I think it's something like 6 or 7 years that I've been advertising Citrix products, and of course about 10 years before that I've been using it. We started using GoToAssist on the Screensavers show that I used to do for Tech TV back probably when you first started. I'm not sure exactly when it was, but it was early 2000s. So I'm a longtime fan, so I'm really pleased to be able to be here. Also, this is one of my favorite topics, something that I think about a lot. I'm both an entrepreneur. I just started a business about 5 years ago called Twit. We're currently a $4 million a year podcast network, which I think we're the only podcast network that can say that, and growing fast. We're building $1 million studio down the street to host our audio and video programming, including about 40 hours a week of live video programming, in addition to the radio show. In fact, some good news. You're the first to hear this. Just yesterday, we came to an agreement with Premier Radio Networks to extend that radio show for another 2 years. So I'm very excited about that. So it's a lot of fun talking about tech, and it's something I cover, and I've been covering for 30 years, since the late 70s. Oh boy, that makes it 40 years, doesn't it? And since tech began, the dawn of tech, and I really enjoy talking about it because it's a subject that's ever changing. And one of the things we've really seen is how that's changing everything in our lives, especially how we work. And so this topic, the future of work, is kind of been a thing that I've been researching and studying for a long time, both as a journalist, as a student of how technology is changing the world, but also as an employer. We have, Twit, my company, is now 17 full-time employees in-house, and nearly 100 contract employees spread out all over the world, all of whom, telecommute essentially to our work using a variety of products, including, of course, GoToMeeting, which we use all the time. So the first slide you're seeing that.
I can actually add to that point too.
Yes.
Our office, for example, is 40% remote. So we're at our headquarters,
there you go.
And also we have so many remote employees, and it's really about hiring for the best talent, regardless of the location. So
exactly.
Just another example of how it's really changing.
Exactly. And my business in radio and television, it's always been the case that you have to be in the studio to do anything, at least until recently, and things have changed a lot. I'll talk about that in a little bit. This first slide here is a picture of the Rouge plant, the big, massive Ford plant in Dearborn, Michigan. It's 1.5 miles by 1 mile. Henry Ford started building it after the success of the Model T to create Ford automobiles in the teens, the 19-teens. And the idea of the Rouge plant was that raw materials would come in by boxcar, literally iron ore and lumber, and Model Ts would come out the other end. This plant is still operating. It's still in effect. The reason it starts our talk today is because this is the last time work changed significantly. Prior to the industrial era, represented by the Rouge plant, work was very different. People kind of owned their job. If you were a blacksmith or a metal worker, you created something from start to finish. You had an ownership in it. It was a product that you knew and created. And it was Henry Ford and others, Winchester, of course, too, who discovered that in the industrial era, it was more efficient to have an assembly line, to have workers who did one small piece of a larger piece of work. And that really significantly changed, first of all, how people worked, because they had to do shift work. They had to come in and be there, because when the assembly line starts, you've got to be there on the assembly line, and that part goes whizzing by. And they also lost, I think, a sense of ownership. It's something Ford's really addressed. We visited this plant in July of this year. We actually were able to take our cameras down onto the assembly line and ride the assembly line. And one of the things Ford's really tried to address is how to give workers a sense of satisfaction and ownership when they're really just a cog in the machine. And I think they've done a good job in many ways. They have small worker groups that are worker-led, quality circle-style groups where they feel some responsibility for the parts that they do. A team will work on a large chunk of the automobile, the the plant we saw was making Ford F-150 trucks, and the team would work on the cab. So they at least had some sense that they were doing the cab. But it is difficult, for in this environment for a worker to have a sense of pleasure and joy in what they're doing. So we moved to slide. Whoops, let me go back. We moved to slide 2, which is my favorite TV show, Mad Men, and even from the Mad Men era, we've seen a huge change. The days of going to work for a firm right out of college and spending your career there and getting the gold watch and retiring at the end, it feels about as dated as Mad Men does, doesn't it? I mean, people just don't do that anymore. There, of course, are still workers on the Ford assembly line, and there probably will be for a long time to come. There are still plenty of office workers who work 9 to 5 in cubicles. But what we've seen in the tech industry, and I think this is a bellwether for all industry, is a huge change in how people work, in their expectations, and in what they are looking for in an employment, and frankly, what employers are looking for. I guess one way to kind of characterize this is work isn't somewhere you go, it's something you do. And that's a huge change. You don't have to go to the cubicle or the factory floor anymore to work. And in fact, it's thanks to products like GoToMeeting, GoToMyPC, the Citrix products, that this is the case. We use Skype a lot. In fact, most of my podcasts, the hosts are remote from everywhere, from Germany to England to New York. They join us via Skype and other teleconferencing products. Some of our hosts show screens using GoToMeeting. It really is possible to do hard to believe, possible to do a TV show with hosts that are spread out all over the world without a big satellite downlink. Here are a few things to think about as an employee. I originally created this presentation to present to the Board of Trustees at a local high school to help them think about the world that these high school kids were going into. And it's really appropriate for the world that we're all young people are going into nowadays. It's changed quite a bit, and they need to think of their future a little bit differently. And this is true if you're an employer of your employees and of how you structure your business. It's certainly true of you, even if you're my age, if you're in your 50s and you're an employee. Point number 1 is you can't just show up, punch a time card, have coffee all day. People know how productive you are. We now have the tools, business intelligence tools, so that each and every worker, we know how productive you are. I just saw a statistic that every employee at Apple makes Apple about $400,000 a year. That's the kind of numbers that we know now. You cannot spend all your day on Facebook. Nobody's going to take your word for it. We can measure how productive you are. Furthermore, the future of work is flat. This is what I was talking about earlier. You've heard Thomas Friedman talk about how the world is flat. It's a really great book if you haven't read his books. He talks a lot about globalization and the global economy. And international borders are dissolved. The notion of everybody having to get together in a conference room. Well, look what we're doing right now. There's hundreds of us all over the world talking together. And I think that this is an example of how business has changed significantly. It's about communication, not location. And that's really important. In fact, increasingly, it's a challenge that we're trying to solve at TWIT. Not only are our employees distributed all over the world, but our audience is distributed all over the world, and we want to interact with them. So communication, real-time communication, becomes very, very important. And tools that allow people to participate and to work without being in the same location are absolutely key. Very important, and this was a message, particularly for these teenagers who are, heading to college, and in fact, many of them now are going to be heading to graduate school as well, because, frankly, competition is pretty rough these days. You're competing with not only with people all over the world, but with people with all sorts of capabilities. In fact, in some cases, you're competing with the crowd. A good example is the Amazon Mechanical Turk and systems like that. Amazon set this up as a way to take many, many people to solve a problem. We use a transcription service that uses something like the Mechanical Turk. Instead of a single typist sitting down and listening to our audio recording and then typing it in and transcribing it, a slow and very expensive product, this service uses computers to take the audio and divide it up into small 5 or 10 second chunks. And then each of those chunks is sent to 3 different people who are paid pennies to transcribe that 1 or 2 sentence chunk. Then the 3 transcriptions are compared, and a good final transcription is generated, again, automatically from the 3 transcriptions. Where there's consensus among the 2 or 3, it's very clear that that was accurate. And when there isn't consensus, they'll send that chunk out again to 3 more people. And because it's only pennies for each chunk, they can get very accurate transcriptions very inexpensively. And you might wonder, well, who are these people willing to do this for pennies at a time? And there are quite a few. The Mechanical Turk has hundreds of thousands of people who do exactly this. They solve small problems. They may solve many throughout the day. A lot of them are in the third world or in India. China, too, is very interested in this business. When I was in China last year, I talked to a number of companies, and one of the things they're doing aggressively in China is teaching English to everybody, all the students. They want them to learn English because they realize there's a huge amount of business that they can get, just as India has, from American companies outsourcing things like transcription. So your job may not only be done by some person in India, it may be done by some thousands of people in India. That can be very scary for people growing up, but it's an important thing to think about.
You know, Leo, can I actually add to that point real quick?
Sure, please do.
Competition and education. So this is kind of an aside, but I'm not sure if any of you have seen that documentary, Waiting for Superman, but it's all about the educational system. It's pretty incredible, and I learned a lot. But really, they said, I think, in 20 to 30 years, the skilled workers, so knowledge workers, we won't have enough qualified applicants within the U.S., and it really will be outsourced because, like you said, the competition, and they know how much opportunity there is. So it's just another point about realizing that competition out there, especially for more technology-focused jobs and skilled labor jobs.
Yeah, the only thing I disagree with is I don't think it's going to take 30 years. I think it might be happening right now in a lot of areas. Yeah. Although it's interesting, there are companies. One of our advertisers is Carbonite, which is a backup system, and they've moved their support in-house because they had it in India. They were a small company, and it was the only way they could do it. And they found that American customers would tend to be very dissatisfied by offshore support. So it certainly is an issue that quality is important. We have another advertiser who shall remain nameless who just recently moved their U.S. support team to India, and I can't tell you how many disgruntled customers I'm hearing from because the Indian support staff just doesn't provide the same quality of support. Now, that can be solved. That's an issue of training. That's an issue of time and education, and I think it will be solved. The other point here is that the future of work is on demand. You no longer, as I said, will have a job for life. Nobody's going to guarantee you a career. In fact, the whole notion of career is rapidly becoming outdated in the sense that I've decided I am going to be, an advertising executive, and you go to work for an advertising company. That whole concept is outdated, which is a disruption for sure, but in the long run, I think really celebrates the power of the individual, the power of the knowledge worker, of somebody who has skills and can use those skills. And that's what's really leading to this thing that is sometimes called the gig economy. I'll talk about that in just a second. This is the other important message, is that the young people get it. They already work this way. They already know about this. And here they come. These businesses were all started by kids who were in college. Many of them dropped out to pursue these businesses. We all know about Microsoft. We all know about Facebook. But don't forget Dell, FedEx was started by, Fred was a graduate student at Yale when he thought up the idea of FedEx, Napster, and of course Google, most famously started by 2 Stanford graduate students. They got their degree, but in fact, they currently hire more PhDs than any other company in the world at Google. The reason this slide is important is because the way work is changing, is changing first in technology, and is seen first by young people. They readily understand that the world has changed, and they jump on this bandwagon, and they, I think in general, see this as a huge opportunity. When I've given this talk, a lot of people say, well, my work hasn't changed like this. And it may be the case. It happens, things often happen first in technology, but I think technology is a bellwether for what is going to happen in every industry soon. We're seeing it happen. If you were a travel agent, you've already seen it happen. If you're a realtor, you're starting to see it happen. I feel sorry for you if you own a DVD rental business, unless it's Netflix. These things are changing very, very quickly, almost too quickly even to prepare for or notice. Of course, the most famous college kid these days is Time Magazine's Man of the Year. He was a sophomore when he started Facebook and left school, left Harvard to come to California and to be an entrepreneur. This guy is kind of interesting because if you look at his CV in high school, he was very accomplished in classics. Won a prize, in fact, at his private school for classics. He was a fencer, very interesting fella, very accomplished fella in a lot of areas. And I think what Mark Zuckerberg combines is traits that are going to be prized more and more in the future. When I went to Yale in the mid-'70s, everybody there was pre-law or pre-med, or going for an MBA. There was a very clear career path that you followed. And it wasn't to start a tech company in your sophomore year and drop out and be the world's youngest billionaire by the age of 25. The key really is to create your career, not to follow somebody else's career path, but to find your skills and abilities and then become essentially an entrepreneur. Alan Kay, who's a brilliant computer scientist, a Disney Imagineer now, he worked at Apple as an Apple Fellow, said the best way to predict the future is to invent it. The best way to have a career is to create it. Create your own career. The key to becoming a success, and I use the word entrepreneur, I think a lot of times we think of an entrepreneur as somebody who has an idea, goes out, gets venture capital, starts a business, builds a business, and then goes public or sells it to Google or Yahoo and makes $1 million. And that's really not what I mean when I say entrepreneur. The skills of an entrepreneur are somebody who invents their career, invents their life, invents their job. And one of the reasons I'm an entrepreneur is because I never was happy working for someone else. For a long time, certainly in my age group, that was the only choice we had. The people who started their own businesses were few and far between. That's changed dramatically. And in fact, I would say that somebody who has the employee mindset is going to struggle a little bit in this modern world. Your business is you. You're the entrepreneur. So what does it take to succeed in this? You've got to be willing to take risks. That's why young people are so good at this, because they expect to fail. They don't expect to march out the gate. Well, some anyway. The ones that work and succeed don't expect to march out the door and be instant successes. They know that they're going to have to struggle. They're going to have to work hard. And most importantly, the ones that are the most successful are driven by their passion, their thing that they love, not by a desire to get rich. And I've talked to so many venture capitalists and so many entrepreneurs, and again, these come up. The key is that somebody is doing something they really care deeply about. The best startups, the ones that venture capitalists invest in, are the ones where the founder isn't saying, hey, how am I going to make $1 billion? The founder is saying, I've got an itch, I've got a scratch. I have an idea that I think is going to change the world. I want to change the world. And I think that that's true whether you're starting a startup or whether you're doing your career. You've got to find that thing that you care the most about. And by the way, this is a message not just for those people listening who our employees, but for those people who are small business people who are hiring employees. You want people who are doing it for love, who are doing what they care about. And so even if you are running a business, and this is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, you've got to foster passion in your employees. Now, some of that is by giving them autonomy. In my business, we're making lemonade out of the lemons that we've been given. The television industry has become a nickel and dime industry as the costs have skyrocketed and the revenues have plummeted. One of the reasons you see a lot of reality television, for instance, is it's very cheap to make, relatively much cheaper than a show like Mad Men or The Sopranos. It costs next to nothing. There's a lot of economic pressure right now on people creating media, and there's even more economic pressure on people in my business, in the new media business. I'm doing for a $4 million company more programming than NBC or CBS, more original programming than a major television network, and the only way we can do that is by making it cheaply. And the key on this is making lemonade out of these lemons. This fact that we have no money to create this. What it does is it encourages us to tell our employees, to give our employees control of their project, to give them autonomy. There's a term that is used more and more in the television business called predator. In the past, there's been a very clear demarcation among the jobs done in a television, let's say a television segment. You have talent, people in front of the camera. You have a producer, who's essentially the real journalist doing the writing and putting the piece together. You have a camera operator, you have a sound operator, and you have an editor who does the editing of the piece. And that was 5 different jobs. In many television situations nowadays, those 5 jobs have been combined into 1 or 2, often just 1. And that's what we call a predator, which is a producer-editor. It's somebody who not only, but often is talent as well. So they will be in front of the camera, they will be behind the camera, they will be editing, they'll be producing. And while that is a lot more work, it requires somebody who has a very flexible frame of mind, but also somebody who really wants ownership of that project. And so there's the lemonade in that. That predator gets to create something on their own, and it really works well. Now, of course, we still have a lot of collaboration, and that's where this gig economy comes in. We have, for instance, the people who do the person actually who does our show opens, all the graphics in the show opens. I don't even know where he lives. I think he's in Florida. We create gigs for people. They come in, teams form, they coalesce, and then they move off. And so they get some ownership in what they do, which is, I think, fantastic. A really good example of this, even in a large enterprise, is Google. Google realized that, they're creating this cubicle environment for young people coming out of college who expect to be entrepreneurs, who expect to have their own businesses. How do you get a kid coming out of college whose real goal in life is to start their own business? How do you get them to sit in a cubicle and work? Well, Google's done a lot of things. They have a lot of autonomy for their various departments. People who create products in the Googleverse really get to own them almost as if they're startups. Google very consciously makes every division feel like a startup. But they also give all their employees an assignment. They have a 20% project. They're asked to take 1 day out of 5 and work on their own passion project. I think this is a brilliant move by Google because you inspire your employees. They get excited. They get to do what they want. Some of these passion projects are silly, of course, but some of them aren't. Passion projects that have succeeded at Google are Gmail. Paul Buchheit's 20% project was Gmail, Google News, and the thing that makes Google the most money of all, AdSense, was a 20% project. Google was a search company, and somebody said, "Hey, we could put ads on this search based on contextual information from the search." It's where Google makes all its money. So these 20% projects serve 2 purposes. They empower employees, they excite them, they give an opportunity, and frankly, they make the company a lot of money. So it is not inconsistent to have your employees working for the love of it. So if we were to characterize how things have changed from the Mad Men days or the Rouge Plant days, in the old days, work was hierarchical. You had a boss, you had employees. Employees marched to the orders of the boss. It was very routine. You would clock in and clock out. You'd be doing the same thing for many years. One of the things they changed at the Rouge plant is people's assignment gets changed pretty regularly. So they're not making the same widget day in, day out. There were advantages to the old ways. You had a job for life, perhaps, although even that, as layoffs have occurred in many big industry jobs, I guess maybe even that wasn't true. I know it's quite a shock for these employees who, 40 years ago said, hey, we've got a job for life, and don't. On the other hand, these kinds of enterprises are not very flexible. They're rigid. They don't take chances. They tend to be very focused on the local, very parochial, very insular. And this is an interesting kind of shift. These industries tended to be very closed off and competitive with other industries. And we're seeing quite a change in our business and other businesses. Instead of being hierarchical, the organizations tend to be not only flat but fluid. The person who is an employee one day may be the boss in the next project, very flexible. Instead of one job for life, you will have many jobs for life. My daughter, who's in college, a freshman in college, is challenged because she says, there's so many things I want to do. I can't decide. And I told her, hey, don't worry. By the time you're my age, you will have worked at 10 different jobs. You will get to do all of them at one point. So pick the one you love the most right now, but don't feel like you're closing any doors. And I think that's exciting. I think that means that people coming up today are going to have many, many more opportunities to do things. But, of course, that requires a willingness to fail, to take chances. Not everything you do will be a great success, but it's very important to understand that failure is not a negative in this new economy. Of course, instead of being an insular company looking just down the road for our customers, every company today is global. Even if you're a China shop in town, you're selling goods that Amazon can sell, that people can go online and order from China, literally. So you're no longer competing with the store down the street. You're competing with everybody, and that means if you're a business, you've got to be connected. You've got to be global. You've got to be aware. And instead of competing, I think it's important to think of collaborating. We use the term a lot in my business, co-opetition. Of course, I'm in a new business. New media is very new, and there are many people doing what I'm doing. And instead of trying to beat them, what we do is we share our knowledge, because it's very important to me to create this category, to have a lot of companies in this category to validate it. So we've been very open about how we do all the things we do at TWIT. We've published specs for the unique technology that we've built, like our Skyposaurus and our Streamosaurus, and told people, and a lot of podcasters come by the studio, and I show them everything. We've made videos. We keep no secrets, because I think we all benefit from that kind of free flow of information. I think that that's the new internet way of thinking of things, that information benefits everybody, and a rising tide raises all ships, of course. And so, especially in a new business like ours, but I think this is true in any business, sharing that knowledge, sharing that information helps us all. So it's a very different way of thinking, I have to say. Jessica's pointing out that if you have any questions, you can start entering them now. We certainly would love to answer questions as we come closer to the end of this piece. Here's a great quote I found from the CIO, the Chief Information Officer at FedEx, Rod Carter. He was talking about how today's kids are so well suited for the future of business because they play games like World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft, it's funny, Joy Ito, who is a brilliant entrepreneur and venture capitalist, says that World of Warcraft is the new golf. I don't know if this ended up being the case or not, but he loves playing World of Warcraft. And it's interesting, the skills you learn playing this online game are very interesting. It's very collaborative. You essentially, you have a character that you are trying to build up to have more gold, to have more experience points, and ultimately to level up to the highest level. But the way you do that is not on your own generally, but in forming teams, ad hoc teams of people that go out on quests. You'll get together, you'll combine skills in a unique way. You don't want to have 20 people who are all warriors. You need a warrior and a mage and an elf. You need a variety of people doing a variety of things. There's a class that a lot of people attain to called Tank, which is a warrior class in World of Warcraft, where essentially you've spent a long time building up a huge amount of armor. You don't move very fast, but you're very hard to kill. And tanks are very useful in these quests because they can go in ahead of the rest of the group and just take a lot of damage, allowing the group to do the other things that they need to do. You move very quickly. You have to be very fluid in a very changing environment. You get together, combine skills, you accomplish the goal, and then you dissolve. You don't go on to another quest with the same group. Very often you go off now as an individual, having gained new points and new gold and new levels, and you form another group to do another quest. So it's really interesting that World of Warcraft is so very popular, and I think in some ways it is very good training for the future of work, and a lot of these kids and a lot of adults who play World of Warcraft are getting some very interesting skills as a result. I talked to my friend Kevin Rose. Go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to mention, aside from World of Warcraft, just being myself in the Y generation, I've noticed that so many of us do have our own personal blogs and networks and are really trying to reach out to people who aren't just in our local areas. So I think one of the advantages of being technology savvy for the younger generation is knowing how to network and communicate with those that are outside of your local reach, and being able to work in those group environments and collaborative environments, even if you're not in the same building, once you're in that office setting.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Facebook. You guys have Instant Messenger open all the time. You are communicating in very fluid, very interesting ways. One of the things I've noticed is that people don't make phone calls as much as they used to, and if they do, they schedule them ahead of time. It doesn't seem proper anymore in business to pick up the phone and call somebody. You send them an email saying, are you available at a certain time? The phone call is kind of a last resort. A lot more gets done, not even in emails these days, but in instant messaging. Why? Because it's to the point, it's quick, it's fast, it's a fast hit, and it allows you to multitask. So we're really seeing these technology tools completely change the way we work. Look at LinkedIn. There's a very good example of how people can find other people to form temporary collaborative teams. So it's extremely powerful. People still get jobs. Go ahead.
I'd have to say, too, just some advice to business managers out there. It's been really helpful in our teams, especially since so many of us are remote, to have a conversation about what's your preferred way to communicate. So I've noticed that my management, who are a little bit older, they would prefer the phone, and they're not going to be as responsive to email or I am. So I know when I'm approaching them, that's how I have to get their attention. But then if I'm talking, I know. And then if I'm talking to my peer who's on the same level and who is really into technology and does have maybe their Facebook open or their GChat IM, that's how you get a hold of them.
Right.
So it really depends, and I think having that conversation is helpful in the business setting.
Well, and that's, again, where fluidity is so important. There aren't any rules anymore. And so the person who's going to succeed in business is somebody who's going to be sensitive to exactly that, Jessica, and know how each individual needs to be worked with and approached. And that's where the lack of, disappearing hierarchy has left us all kind of floating. But the people who are adapting to this, because they're fluid, they're flexible, they can work ad hoc as needed, are really doing much better. And I feel bad for people who need a lot of rigid hierarchy. Now, good news is there's still a lot of jobs like that. I don't know how much longer they'll be in the United States, but there are at least still jobs like that. But going forward, I think every enterprise needs to think about this. One of the things we're dealing with as we build our new facility and our new studio is, do we even put in a phone system? This has been a very surprising question for me. I just assumed, well, we'll get a phone system, a PBX. There'll be a phone on every desk. It's expensive. It's $20 a seat. We'll at least do we were going to do a very modern thing, which is use an internet IP-based phone system called Asterisk using a hosting company, so they host an Asterisk server, which is a kind of a virtual PBX for us. We get IP phones, internet phones on the desks. I thought, oh, we're very modern. And even that is too expensive and outmoded. Half of my employees don't use the phone. The other half use their cell phones. Personal calls are all done on cell phones. Many of them say, I don't need a phone on my desk. I don't want a phone on my desk. If I need to talk to somebody, I'm going to do GoToMeeting, or I'm going to do Skype, or I'm going to do Google Voice, or I'm going to do Instant Messenger. And each person has their own way of doing business. So here we are. We're sitting at this new building thinking, well, how do we solve this? Do we get a phone system? No, we don't. Some people do want a phone with a phone number on their desk and a receptionist at the front desk, but that's only a small percentage of the total workforce. So we're in this great period of change that's very challenging. We still haven't decided what we're going to do about a phone system. I think what we're doing is put a phone system in, but only get a few phones, one in the kitchen. We're going to have an open room that nobody's office where a phone is in there. So if you need to make a phone call, you can go in this room, close the door, and make it. But most of the people are going to be sitting at their desk when they need to meet with somebody. We do this every single day. We launch GoToMeeting, even if we don't have a slide deck or something to show, as I'm doing today, because GoToMeeting, we use the voice over IP part of GoToMeeting, and if the conversation needs to have something shown, for instance, we're talking to our web design team in Vancouver, and we need to and they need to show us something, or we need to show them something, then we have the capability right there. So being flexible and using the tools that are out there is critical. And I would say as an old, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Glenn actually brings up a really good point, and it's kind of the devil's advocate to the conversation about using technology. He says, seems we as a nation need to get back into the production of tangible products too, and not just cyber products. What would you say to that comment?
Well, of course we do produce. We have a very, and I think Ford is a very good example of a company that was an old school industrial company that really fell in hard times. They got a new CEO who was not a member of the family, Alan Mulally, who was an engineer who came from Boeing. In fact, it was he who designed the Boeing 777 cockpit. I mean, this guy is a process guy who came in and said, we have to reinvent this company if we're going to succeed as an industrial company in the 21st century. It is true that goods and products will always need to be made. Most of them are going to be made in China. Let's face it. Currently, all consumer electronics, all of it is made in China. That China is the industrial floor of the world these days, and it's something that we have to, kind of be aware of. There's always going to be machine shops in the U.S. I hope that the auto industry doesn't move offshore, and I know Ford's doing everything they can to make this a viable proposition in the U.S. And I think you're right. We do need manufacture. We do need industry. But the auto industry is a good example. The steel industry also a very good example of, old line American industry that is not succeeding, that is not doing well, and is moving offshore. It's pretty clear that in the future in the U.S., most jobs will be service or information technology jobs. And so, as I said at the beginning, what I'm talking about is a small sector of the economy, the tech-savvy, tech-focused sector. But I do see these trends expanding. And I see companies like Ford that still have assembly lines dealing with these same issues. How do we give our workers a sense of ownership, of autonomy? How do we make their job more satisfying? How do we get away from the 9 to 5 in an particularly difficult environment where you have to be on an assembly line? You have to be there at 9, or that widget's going to go right by you. So it is really true that, I think you've got to be careful about a nostalgia for an America that may not exist going into the 21st century. And change is inevitable. It may not be what we want. It may not make us happy. But it is inevitable. And it's happening right now. My opinion, the best way to deal with it is to acknowledge it, to look it in the eye, and say, how can we make this work for us? How can this make things better? And I think that that's what I'm talking about here, is the opportunity that's presented by this massive change in the way we work. I was talking to my friend Kevin Rose, who is a serial entrepreneur, very smart guy. We hired him as an IT guy at Tech TV, just, a guy who crawled under desks and plugged in printers. And he's so smart that within a couple of years he was on camera doing segments on the show. and within a couple of years after that had the idea for something. He had the idea that news and the top news stories shouldn't be determined by editorial but by the readers. He created Dig. Within just a few years, 27 million unique viewers, unique users every single month. Hugely successful company. And Kevin went through an interesting process, and I've talked a lot to him as a fellow entrepreneur and as a good friend. He initially, as anybody would, when he hired people at Dig, hired them for their degrees, the skills they had listed on their resume. Yes, I'm a PHP programmer. I know Ruby on Rails. I've done these projects. That seems like a sensible way to hire. What he quickly found is that those were not the best employees. He told me, hire an employee because they are smart, creative, passionate. He said, you can learn another programming language. You can learn how to do something. What you need is intelligence, creativity, and a passion and love for what you're doing. And so he completely changed the way he hired people at Dig. In fact, just a year ago, they laid off, I think, 10% of the workforce. I've talked privately to Kevin, and he said, yeah, those were the people that we hired because they had a good resume. And it turned out that they just weren't the people we needed. We needed people with passion, with creativity. And I think that that's a very important lesson to be learned, both as an employer and an employee. That's what employers are going to be looking for. It's good to build your resume. I'm not saying don't build your resume, but I'm saying that it is very important that you consider, when you do build that resume, that you consider a variety of skills, a passion and a love. Find what you love and do it. This is another great entrepreneur, British entrepreneur, Brent Hoberman, who I met in Paris in December at a conference called LeoOnWork, which is a conference of entrepreneurs. It's a fascinating conference. I hope again to go in the winter this year. Put together by Loic Lemur, who is a serial entrepreneur Frenchman who moved to Silicon Valley because he believed that he couldn't be an entrepreneur in Europe. And he does this conference every year, bringing American entrepreneurs like Kevin Rose, like me, to Europe to talk to European entrepreneurs. And Brent, who is a kind of an interesting fellow because he's an American-style entrepreneur in Britain, told me that the reason there isn't a culture of entrepreneurship in Europe right now, for a couple of things. They don't have the venture capital structure that we have in the U.S. But most importantly, they don't have a culture of failure. Failure in Europe is still considered failure. He says in Silicon Valley, when you bring a pitch to a venture capitalist, they want to see what you've done before. In fact, there's no stigma against failure. It's important, he says, and this is what we need to do in Europe, to have a culture where people can try and fail and then try again and not be stigmatized. He said that's the single most important feature that makes America innovative. It's the thing, and to answer our last questioner, we are still the land of innovation. People still look to us all over the world for our creativity, for our innovation, for our ability to invent stuff and change the world. And a lot of that comes from the fact that we're feisty, frontiersmen who were willing to take a chance, a huge risk, and fail, and go back and take that and continue and take that risk again. And so I think this is such an important message, and it really is what we've been talking about all morning, is this notion that to succeed, you've got to be fluid, you've got to be willing to take chances, you've got to do what you love, you've got to be passionate, and out of that comes true success. We live in a world. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a great question from Chris. He's actually had several good questions, and it's about the future and moving forward and being innovative, which is exactly what you're talking about. And he says that social is the big thing now. What is the next big thing in your opinion?
Oh, I get asked this a lot, and I have to say that while this is a great hobby of pundits like me and journalists, is this crystal balling, we almost always get it wrong. One of the things that's most exciting about technology is these discontinuities, these sudden paradigm shifts that nobody expected. Bill Gates, who's one of the smartest men in the world, completely missed the importance of the Internet. Microsoft was chugging along, And in fact, there's a number of very famous events in Microsoft's history where people like Jim Allchin would go to Bill Gates and say, this internet thing's going to be huge. And Bill would say, no. Desktop software is where it's at. And very famously, Bill Gates wrote a memo about 10 years ago and said, whoops, I screwed up. The internet is going to be a big thing. It's very hard to predict. So I would not have predicted the value of social. It's in so much more important than we thought it would be. I mean, I think people who saw Twitter initially, maybe some of you listening, thought, what a waste of time. I still talk to people all the time. The vast majority of people say, who cares what somebody had for lunch? They really don't yet see what Twitter really is. Same thing for Facebook. So social's important. I think if you're going to say the next big thing, I think mobile is huge. You're already seeing that. It's not really any great insight to say that mobile is critical. In fact, I was looking at a video that I made about 10 years ago. I was holding up a Newton and saying, someday all of us will have one of these in our pocket connected to the internet wherever we go, and that's going to change everything. Well, we do. It's called an iPhone, and the fact that information is at your fingertips at all times changes a lot. Mobile is huge. That's where all the innovation is happening right now. And location is a key part of that, the fact that information can know where you are. I think what Google's realizing, Google made all their money on search, on the successful search algorithms they created. What they're realizing is that they're losing ground now because Facebook and others can combine search with social and have the search results be more valuable because they're massaged by who you know and what those people think. And then if you add location to that, it's even much more valuable. And companies like Apple and Facebook are way ahead of Google in this regard. And Google's scrambling. You wouldn't think that a company like Google would be scrambling so soon in its history, but that's a measure of how quickly things are changing. Past globalization, social, location, I'm not sure what the next big thing is. It's so hard to predict, but I think that there's enough on our plate right now that we need to digest and solve and figure out and incorporate into our businesses and our careers that maybe we shouldn't worry so much about what the next big thing is. There's plenty going on right now. So just to sum up, individuals are the key here. When we started at the Rouge plant, it was individuals working as a unit that made it possible to make the Model T efficiently and inexpensively. Now, it's individuals celebrating their individuality, their individual skills, coalescing to get things done and then moving on. Your earning potential doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what degrees you have. It matters what your skills are. It matters what your passion is. Good news for employers is that our workforce doesn't have, as you've learned, Jessica, doesn't have to be sitting in the same building with us. We don't need cubicles anymore. In fact, cubicles are exactly what we don't need. Paul Graham, who is a brilliant entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, he started Y Combinator, which is I would say it's the premier startup school out there. Paul Graham wrote a great think piece, an essay on why the cubicle and the office is the death of productivity. Just think about it. If you're the productive person in a cubicle farm, in an office, you're the one that people are going to try to slow down. They're going to invite you to meetings and parties and birthday cakes and sit around the water cooler because they don't want you to be too successful because you make them look bad. It's really an anti-productivity. The cubicle farm is an anti-productivity tool. So we are spread out. People are now sitting at home. JetBlue's customer service reps are mostly housewives working out of their house. They've set up virtual phone systems, and these women get to say, "Oh, kids are in school. I'm going to work from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. till they get back," and they've made a virtue out of this, and they have a great customer service force. Very few of them who work at the office. Almost all of them work at home. And we can do that thanks to modern phone technology. Modern technology is really great. And finally, many tasks will be solved by teams, just as these World of Warcraft teams go on quests. these teams, and we do this all the time. We create teams around shows. We give those teams some autonomy. They coalesce, they create the show, and then they move on when it's time for the next job to come on. So that's the summary of the talk. I'm very excited by it. I think I'm very challenged. We solve these problems. We are faced with these problems each and every day at my company. As an employee, I think you're faced with these problems each and every day. I think it's something very important to consider. Maybe it hasn't happened yet in your sector of the economy. It will. There's one thing we know is ahead is change. So thank you very much. I'd love to take your questions now.
Sure. Thanks, Leo. I think that was fantastic. And
it's unfortunate, but there are always going to be people who say, hey, this is how we've always done it. It's worked for us. And those people are the Polaroids of the world. They're the companies who aren't going to be around much longer. Maybe it's time to jump that sinking ship.
Yep. I actually have some interesting information about that. The Telework Research Network, they've put out studies about this type of work and how the world is changing, and 1 in 4 employees intends to jump ship within a year, and a way to combat that, people are finding, is this remote work, as 72% of employees actually want these flexible work options.
Of course they do. It just makes you more productive. It makes you, and you can have a life. I mean, I think that's the other thing, is the idea of subsuming making your career subsume everything else, of the stay-at-home mom and the dad who just has no life because he works all the time. That isn't humane. We've got to change this notion, and I think we can. But I have to say, if you're in a workplace that doesn't allow you to have a life, then it's time to find another workplace. Although I think many employers, many businesses are really starting to see the writing on the wall. It may be easier than you think to convince them to let you telecommute, or start small. Part of the problem is fear. I really think a lot of employers say, and I know I'm an employer, feel like if I'm not watching you constantly, you're going to rip me off. You're going to go home and you're going to watch TV all day. And that's where these tools that make it transparent, that make it possible for employers to see what you're doing and see what, I as employer now do not focus on the hours employees keep. I give them a task, a measurable task. I say, do it and get it done. I don't care where or how you get it done. This is your job. And that works so much better for everybody.
I agree. And Best Buy, they actually implemented ROWE, its results-only work environment. So there's a whole structure around this, and they found a lot of positive results. And actually, with flexible work, they say you can increase productivity by 27%.
I agree. Zappos, there's some really great examples out here of the modern economy. Zappos is a wonderful company to look at and to see how Tony Hsieh, its CEO, runs. He's got a book out called is it The Culture of Happiness? I can't remember. It's a new book, but he also publishes every year a book about Zappos corporate culture, which you can get, I think, for free from Zappos if you go to zappos.com. He does a couple of things that are very interesting. He tells employees, take as much vacation as you want. You tell me. There is no set vacation policy. He trusts his employees. And the thing is, because employees love their work, they take less vacation. I have to force my employees to take vacation. He says, take it whenever you want, take as much as you want. And I think that's brilliant. The other thing he does, they have a very, very, really brilliant training program at Zappos. And so if you apply to take a job at Zappos, they sell shoes online. They're owned by Amazon now. To Amazon's credit, they haven't changed a thing. You take the training program at Zappos. At the end of the training program, they offer you a buyout. They say, if you take $5,000 to quit now, we'll give it to you. They want you to quit. They offer you cash to leave after the training program because they say, if you were willing to take the cash, we don't want you. This is very innovative thinking, and it works really well. Zappos has an amazingly inspired, productive workforce. It is one of the true success stories of this decade.
And I think we're reaching the top of the hour, but I've got one last question. Since you are the tech guy and the expert, what do you see are the essential tools in order to advance in this new age of work?
Well, it's, you said it yourself, Jessica. You've got to use the right tool for the situation. If the boss is an old guy who needs a phone call, then you're going to be using the telephone. I think it's very important to think of tools that allow you to work when you want, where you want. Tools like, well, I got to give Citrix a plug. Go to my PC, go to meeting if you're in support. We haven't talked about go to assist, but a great example of tools that you can use to work as you want. A happy employee is a productive employee. I use Skype. We use Google Voice. We use Instant Messenger all the time. We've just created a chat room for our staff. Our staff leaves internet chat up all the time, and we are constantly chatting with each other all over the world. Instant communication with a large group, just as we're doing right now. These tools are out there, but you have to find the right tool. You have to be, again, flexibility is really important. You have to use the tool that's right for the person and that's right for the job.
Great. Thanks, Leo. All right, so we're wrapping up here, everyone. Thanks so much for your questions. You had some fabulous ones. We will follow up with you and also send you a recording of this so you can share with your colleagues. And if you want to hear more from Leo, his great insights, you can check him out on Saturday and Sunday from 2 to 5 on the Premier Radio Networks and also on XM Channel 158.
It's actually 166 now. They moved me a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, okay, 166. And also, check out his network on twit.tv. It's pretty fabulous, and he'll for sure talk more about technology and the future of work and the future of business. Also, for tools to enable this type of work, check out the Citrix Online website. We've got Go to My PC for remote access, Go to Meeting for online collaboration, and Go to Assist if you're an IT professional and you need to support these remote employees. That's the technology for you.
Now, they moved me a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, okay, 166. And also, check out his network on twit.tv. It's pretty fabulous, and he'll for sure talk more about technology and the future of work and the future of business. Also, for tools to enable this type of work, check out the Citrix Online website. We've got Go to My PC for remote access, Go to Meeting for online collaboration, and Go to Assist if you're an IT professional and you need to support these remote employees. That's the technology for you.